He's a frustrated opera singer. I don't know whether you know that or not. And he also double talks Shakespeare, and people believe that he's really doing Shakespeare, and he's not. Don't tell him I told you.
For decades, Dick Van Dyke worked alongside the biggest stars of Hollywood's golden age. To the public, they were charming, talented, and almost untouchable. But behind the cameras, the truth wasn't always so glamorous. In a rare and revealing reflection, Van Dyke hinted that some beloved guest stars weren't the kind souls fans imagined. Egos clashed, cruelty surfaced, and shocking behavior was quietly ignored to protect reputations. Now, those carefully hidden stories are finally coming to light, and they change how we see television's most golden era forever. So join us in this video as we reveal the 9 Golden Age guests Dick Van Dyke tagged evil. Number 9. Carl Reiner. Of all the professional relationships in Dick Van Dyke's long career, none was more significant or complex than his partnership with Carl Reiner, the creative genius behind The Dick Van Dyke Show and a key force in shaping Van Dyke's legacy. While their collaboration produced one of television's most perfect sitcoms, it also sparked a creative tension that, though never erupting into outright conflict, revealed fundamental differences in their comedic sensibilities and moral boundaries. These seeds of tension were present from the very beginning. Reiner, a brilliant writer and performer whose comedy often pushed boundaries, had initially created the show as a vehicle for himself called Head of the Family. When that pilot failed, producer Sheldon Leonard suggested recasting with Van Dyke in the lead, bringing together two talents with overlapping but distinct visions of comedy. Carl was a revolutionary who wanted sitcoms to reflect real life, including its edgier aspects, explained a writer on the show. Van Dyke shared this desire for authenticity, but maintained firmer boundaries around taste and tone, believing comedy could be both realistic and wholesome, funny and relevant, without pushing limits. This philosophical difference played out in regular discussions about scripts over the show's 5-year run. Van Dyke, never demanding changes, would occasionally voice concerns about dialogue or situations he felt crossed family-friendly lines. Reiner, respectful of his star's perspective, yet committed to his vision, sometimes pushed back. They never argued. Both were too professional. Instead, their conversations were fascinating negotiations, with Van Dyke gently suggesting a line might be too much, and Reiner explaining why he thought it essential. This middle ground between Carl's edge and Dick's warmth became a hallmark of the show. One ongoing negotiation involved references to alcohol, particularly Rob Petrie's drinking habits. Drawing from real life and contemporary adult comedy, Reiner initially portrayed Rob as a regular drinker. Van Dyke, uncomfortable with glorifying alcohol, advocated for moderation. The result was a compromise. Rob enjoyed an occasional drink, but never to excess, a balance of realism and responsibility. Similar discussions arose around Rob and Laura Petrie's relationship. While twin beds were a network requirement, Reiner often wanted to push the envelope regarding their intimate life. Van Dyke, never prudish, preferred subtlety, believing the couple's attraction could be acknowledged without dominating the storyline. Carl liked pushing limits. "I liked keeping things warm," Van Dyke later said, acknowledging the tension that shaped one of television's most successful collaborations. Mutual respect kept their partnership thriving. Reiner valued Van Dyke's warmth and likability, knowing it made sophisticated content accessible to viewers. Van Dyke, in turn, trusted Reiner's brilliance and appreciated how his boundary-pushing instincts prevented the show from becoming saccharine or simplistic. Even decades later, their friendship remained strong, though creative differences occasionally resurfaced during talks of reunions or special episodes. When Reiner passed in 2020 at age 98, Van Dyke's tribute was both heartfelt and revealing. Carl was brilliant, but what made him truly special was his willingness to listen and collaborate, even when we saw things differently. This nuanced partnership, marked by tension but never conflict, by difference but never division, remains the most significant relationship in Van Dyke's career, proving that the best creative collaborations aren't always easy. Yet they can produce work neither could have created alone. From Reiner's tension to a wilder chaos, could comedy hide evil? Keep watching to find out. Number 8. Jim Carrey. As comedy evolved through the decades, Dick Van Dyke watched new performers rise with styles dramatically different from his carefully crafted approach. None illustrated this shift more starkly than Jim Carrey, whose manic energy and extreme physical comedy in the 1990s contrasted sharply with Van Dyke's measured, precise style. While Van Dyke never publicly criticized Carrey, those close to him recall that he privately expressed reservations about what he saw as the younger performer's excessive approach, creating a symbolic generational divide that reflected Van Dyke's own comedic philosophy. A longtime friend remembered how Van Dyke would watch Carrey's films with a mix of admiration and discomfort. He'd acknowledge Carrey's incredible physical talent and commitment, then shake his head and say, "He's trying too hard to be funny," instead of just being funny. It wasn't jealousy, it was a fundamental difference in philosophy about how comedy should work. For Van Dyke, whose physical comedy was always grounded in character and story, Carrey's extreme facial contortions and frenetic energy seemed to sacrifice relatability for shock value. While he respected Carrey's gifts, Van Dyke worried this style moved comedy away from the human connection he considered essential. When asked directly about Carrey, Van Dyke offered a diplomatic answer, praising the need for different styles in different eras. Yet he quietly added, "I always believed you didn't need to hit the audience over the head to make them laugh. The best comedy comes from truth, not exaggeration." It wasn't criticism exactly, more like concern from a master craftsman seeing his field move in a direction he didn't entirely understand. This philosophical difference became even clearer in the late 1990s, when both were considered for a major comedy film. Though they would have played different roles, Van Dyke reportedly declined after learning of Carrey's involvement, telling his agent he didn't think their styles would mesh on screen. It wasn't personal. He had never met Jim. It was purely artistic. He didn't see how his subtle, character-based approach could coexist with Carrey's extreme style without creating a jarring tonal disconnect. The dynamic is particularly poignant because both men share remarkable physical gifts and precise control over their bodies as comedic instruments. In another era, they might have recognized each other as kindred spirits. Instead, they came to represent different chapters in comedy's evolution. Van Dyke embodying restraint and universal accessibility, Carrey pushing the limits of physical comedy. Ironically, both have shown considerable range beyond their signature styles. Van Dyke could be explosively energetic when needed, while Carrey demonstrated subtle dramatic depth in The Truman Show and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. In recent years, as Carrey has stepped back from extreme comedy and Van Dyke has reflected on his long career, the symbolic divide has perhaps narrowed. Yet this quiet artistic disagreement reveals Van Dyke's core belief. Enduring comedy comes not from pushing boundaries for shock alone, but from finding universal human truth even in the most physical humor. Wild comedy met a shadow of power. Who truly crossed the line? Let's find out. Number 7. Frank Sinatra. Under the magnificent crystal chandeliers of the Sands Hotel Ballroom in Las Vegas during the 1960s, the air always carried the rich scent of premium cigars and expensive bourbon. It was a sanctuary of glamour, where crisp tuxedos and silk gowns created the perfect facade for Hollywood's golden age. Yet, for Dick Van Dyke, whenever he stepped into that space in the presence of the man dubbed the Chairman, Frank Sinatra, the atmosphere seemed to thicken and become almost suffocating. In the unspoken memoirs of backstage life, every gala or TV show featuring Sinatra turned into a theater of fear for those in his orbit. Sinatra always arrived with a large entourage, thugs ready to act at the slightest sign of displeasure. At Hollywood's most prestigious fundraisers and concerts, Dick often witnessed how Sinatra wielded power to manipulate and bully those without a voice or influence. One incident, etched in Van Dyke's memory, occurred during a live broadcast sound check. A young sound technician, nervous in the presence of Sinatra's aura, accidentally caused a slight microphone feedback hiss. The ballroom went silent. Sinatra didn't yell immediately. He walked up to the trembling young man, eye to eye, exuding supreme contempt. With a cloud of white smoke around him, Sinatra delivered a chilling sentence. "You have 10 seconds to disappear from my sight before I turn your career into ash." The horror wasn't just in the words. It was in how Sinatra stripped a human being of dignity with calculated ruthlessness. Van Dyke, standing at a distance, felt the injustice, but knew that resistance in Sinatra's empire could mean career death. Sinatra's contempt extended beyond the backstage crew. At a private party after the show, Van Dyke watched the singer humiliate a rising young actor who had inadvertently drawn the attention of a female star Sinatra favored. The humiliation was public, sharp, and deliberate. When the young man tried to apologize, Sinatra smirked arrogantly. "There's no room for apprentices here. Go back to where you belong," he said. For Van Dyke, a man who valued kindness and integrity, Sinatra embodied the ugliest aspects of fame. Behind the smooth love songs that touched millions, he created an environment ruled by fear and submission. Their relationship always remained polite but tense. Van Dyke often felt the urge to speak up for those bullied. Yet in the harsh Hollywood society of that era, integrity sometimes had to yield to silent survival. Watching injustice unfold, powerless to intervene, was deeply painful for him. Sinatra's reach extended like tentacles into casinos, film studios, and the highest echelons of Hollywood. His power-based cruelty robbed the art form of warmth, leaving an indelible mark on those who witnessed it firsthand. And yet, if Sinatra was a terror of raw power, the next figure Van Dyke observed represented a very different tragedy. A person celebrated as a symbol of kindness and laughter, but in reality a miser and hypocrite to a degree that would shock anyone. Number 6. Bob Hope. Behind the philanthropic smiles and endless USO tours, the world knew Bob Hope as the great artist who brought laughter to soldiers on distant battlefields, the funny uncle of every American family. But behind those chivalrous tours and grand fundraising galas lurked a ruthless business machine and a heart surprisingly stingy. During collaborations on special programs, Dick Van Dyke was often stunned by the stark contrast between this humanitarian icon and a man who calculated every penny when dealing with his subordinates. Unlike stars who squandered money on booze or gambling, Bob Hope was a true billionaire, owning thousands of acres in the San Fernando Valley. Yet his immense wealth stood in sharp contrast to his generosity. In Hollywood, whispers circulated about Hope never carrying a wallet, expecting assistants, junior actors, and even crew members to cover his meals or coffee. Van Dyke witnessed him casually leaving a luxury restaurant after rehearsal without leaving a tip, ignoring waiters who had worked tirelessly to please the superstar. Hope's sophisticated ruthlessness also lay in how he maintained his good guy image. Backstage at a military Christmas show, a young writer requested a small raise after months of dedication. Hope didn't smile or encourage him. Instead, he gave a sharp, cold look, adjusted his cap, and said, "You should feel honored to stand under my halo instead of demanding meaningless checks." That sentence summarized Hope's life philosophy. People were tools to serve his greatness, and his fame was a favor that lesser people should cherish, not a salary. Van Dyke realized that the USO tours, as generous as they seemed, were carefully calculated PR campaigns. Hope loved the soldiers, but he loved their worship even more, using every moment to build his moral portfolio without spending a single cent from his own pocket. His stinginess extended even to family and close associates, with tales of extreme financial strictness while he owned real estate worth hundreds of millions. This hypocrisy shocked Van Dyke, who couldn't understand how someone could preach sharing and compassion on stage while leaving longtime collaborators in financial distress. Bob Hope's manipulation of public perception only deepened the sting. His massive PR team ensured no unfavorable stories surfaced. At parties, he appeared polite, but off camera, he became irritable, ordering staff around with condescension. Van Dyke once witnessed Hope refuse a job referral to an elderly colleague with health problems. "Hollywood has no place for has-beens and the sick. Look after yourself," he said, slamming the door on someone in need and extinguishing the last flicker of Van Dyke's respect. Ultimately, Dick Van Dyke saw the truth. Behind the "God bless you" greetings and the sold-out shows was a man where money and fame had replaced humanity. Bob Hope was a great businessman in the guise of a comedian. A man who sold smiles to the world while hoarding warmth for himself. Keep watching to find out who was next on Dick Van Dyke's list. Number 5. Peter O'Toole. Under the cold drizzle of London on a late afternoon in the 1970s, streetlights blurred on the cobblestones around the West End. In an old pub with smoke-stained walls, noisy laughter suddenly fell silent as a gaunt man with eyes as blue as jade and an ethereal beauty walked in. It was Peter O'Toole, the legendary Lawrence of Arabia. But for Dick Van Dyke, every encounter with that face revealed not a silver screen hero, but chaos fueled by bottomless bottles of hard liquor. If the previous chapters exposed hypocrisy, bullying, or arrogance, this final tale of O'Toole was a tragedy of self-destruction and unconscious cruelty toward colleagues. Van Dyke, who had fought his own battles with alcoholism, felt a mix of pain and disgust, watching O'Toole turn Hollywood professionalism into a careless joke. O'Toole's wretchedness stemmed from recklessness so extreme it bordered on cruelty. On film sets and backstage, he disregarded time and responsibility, turning every production into a battlefield of drunkenness. Days-long all-night drinking sessions left crews waiting in despair. For a man who valued discipline like Van Dyke, O'Toole's behavior was a direct insult to dedicated artists. One incident remained etched in Van Dyke's memory. At a prestigious award ceremony, O'Toole appeared disheveled, reeking of whiskey, barely able to stand. Rather than maintaining minimal politeness, he interrupted an actress speaking, flinging meaningless jokes with a flippant attitude. When a stage manager tried to guide him off stage, O'Toole shoved the man to the floor and shouted to the auditorium of A-list stars, "This world is too boring to be sober, and you are all just puppets trying to play grown-ups." It was not just drunken rambling. It was a declaration of war against all moral standards. Van Dyke realized O'Toole's wretchedness relied on his charm and extraordinary talent as an excuse for terrible behavior. People forgave him because he acted brilliantly, because he was beautiful. And that forgiveness only fed the monster who despised discipline. Stories circulated of him forcing co-stars into dozens of retakes simply because he was too drunk to remember a line, laughing it off as if it were charming. His recklessness extended to actions that endangered others, from dangerous after-hours games to wild car races, dragging younger colleagues into a vortex of fear, admiration, and self-destruction. Many careers went up in smoke, while O'Toole remained untouchable under the halo of genius. In a rare moment sitting opposite him at a party, Van Dyke saw a chilling emptiness in those blue eyes. When asked if he regretted the havoc he caused film crews, O'Toole swirled his wine, staring into the void, and said bitterly, "I owe no one an apology for choosing to live true to my own madness." At that moment, Van Dyke understood. Salvation is impossible for someone who does not want to be saved. Peter O'Toole's wretchedness was the wretchedness of a self-consumed genius, dragging everyone around him into his fire. Alcohol blurred the line between reality and fantasy, shattering trust and leaving collaborators adrift. As Van Dyke's memories of O'Toole's chaos came to a close, he stretched, took a deep breath of Malibu's fresh sea air, and felt a quiet relief in having exposed the final dark corners of his journey through Hollywood's hidden cruelty. Chaos and charm masked a chilling hypocrisy. Whose darkness cut deepest? Stay tuned to find out. Number 4. Bing Crosby. In a sun-drenched reading room at his Malibu mansion, Dick Van Dyke sat quietly on a leather armchair worn by time. Through the large window, the Pacific waves lapped the shore with a steady rhythm, echoing the enduring beat of Hollywood he had lived through for nearly a century. At 100 years old, his mind remained as sharp as a living dictionary. Yet those kind blue eyes sometimes darkened as he turned the pages of memories the public had never known. People remembered Dick for his beaming smile, lively dances, and a scandal-free life. But behind that national persona were lessons in character he learned through extreme patience while facing flawed monuments of fame. One name that haunted him was the man with the voice of an angel, but the heart of stone. Bing Crosby. To the world, Crosby was the embodiment of American family values, the sweet voice behind White Christmas. But for Van Dyke, who shared stage and studio lights with him, the truth carried a bitter taste of hypocrisy. Bing's wretchedness wasn't loud fits of rage, it was a cold power, a quiet contempt for anyone he deemed beneath him. Van Dyke recalled a variety show taping in the 1960s. On stage, Bing smiled benevolently, patting Dick on the shoulder like a respected uncle. But the moment the director yelled, "Cut!" that smile vanished instantly, replaced by an icy detachment. No greeting, no glance for those who had just created magic with him. "I used to admire him like a saint," Van Dyke remembered. But near Bing, a cold current lingered. He didn't see colleagues, he saw tools to polish his own greatness. The cruelty was most visible toward lower-level staff. A young technician once dropped a microphone near Crosby, and instead of sympathy, he received a glare and subtle insults aimed at his poverty and low status. For Van Dyke, a man who valued basic kindness, the act cut deep into his faith in art. Even more disturbing was the contrast between Crosby's public image and his private life. Rumors of harsh discipline toward his children and casual cruelty were whispered in Hollywood circles. While singing about family love on air, Crosby could recount punishing his own children as if it were a proud authority display. His womanizing was an open secret, calculated extramarital affairs that he executed to protect his public image. To Van Dyke, this wasn't merely immoral, it was a profound deception of the public. Crosby lived for no one but his ego. Looking at an old photo of himself and Crosby, both smiling on a bookshelf, Van Dyke now saw bitter irony. Talent might lift someone to the pinnacle, but it cannot mask a withered soul filled with contempt for others. He had remained silent during those years out of professionalism. But the truth about this Santa Claus left a scar in his heart. Van Dyke learned an expensive lesson. You can sing songs of paradise, but if your heart dwells in the hell of complacency and hypocrisy, all the glory eventually becomes cold ash. Who else did Dick Van Dyke name as actually evil? Keep watching to find out more. Number 3. Julie Andrews. Few on-screen partnerships feel as natural and joyful as Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews in Disney's Mary Poppins. Their musical numbers, particularly the iconic Jolly Holiday sequence, seem to capture pure, spontaneous delight, as if the performers had discovered perfect artistic complements in each other. Yet, behind the camera, the relationship was far more complex. While never hostile, their interactions carried a subtle tension that both worked diligently to keep from affecting the magic on screen. Crew members recalled that both were consummate professionals who respected each other enormously, but came from very different performance traditions. The charm audiences witnessed was carefully cultivated, not spontaneous friendship. Andrews, trained in classical voice and British theatre, brought precision and technical perfection to every note. Van Dyke, largely self-taught and rooted in American television comedy, relied on intuition, physical expression, and comedic timing. This contrast sometimes created small frictions during rehearsals. Andrews could appear mildly disconcerted by Van Dyke's improvisation, while Van Dyke admitted feeling intimidated by her flawless technique. "She never makes mistakes. I find that both impressive and a little terrifying," he later confessed to an assistant choreographer, reflecting his admiration mixed with a touch of self-consciousness. Tensions were further complicated by casting choices. Van Dyke played both Bert the chimney sweep and the elderly banker, Mr. Dawes Sr., while Andrews had only the title role. Though she never expressed dissatisfaction publicly, some crew sensed subtle disappointment. Despite this, both performers maintained absolute professionalism, ensuring personal dynamics never disrupted their work. Director Robert Stevenson strategically scheduled their most critical scenes early to preserve on-screen chemistry, a tactic that succeeded brilliantly. The finished film presents a partnership that appears effortless and joyous, with no hint of the careful management behind the scenes. In later years, Van Dyke and Andrews maintained cordial professional respect, but never developed the close personal friendship fans assumed. They appeared together at Disney events and Mary Poppins anniversaries with warm public interactions, leaving the illusion intact. Van Dyke once tactfully told a reporter, "Julie is extraordinary, one of the most gifted performers I've ever worked with. We had different approaches to getting there, but we both wanted the same magical result for the audience." What he left unsaid, but insiders understood, was that the enchantment audiences cherished came from discipline and commitment, not effortless chemistry. This carefully managed partnership highlights Van Dyke's character, an unwavering commitment to the audience above personal comfort or ego. Whatever private reservations he held about working with Andrews, he never let them diminish the joyful illusion that generations of viewers continue to treasure, a testament to the professionalism that defined his entire career. If Julie Andrews unsettled him, what torment did the next Golden Age star unleash? Let's find out. Number 2. Walter Matthau. The brief collision of Dick Van Dyke and Walter Matthau in a 1964 stage production offered a striking study in contrast. Van Dyke, brimming with energy and optimism, met Matthau, world-weary and perpetually cynical. Their fundamentally different approaches to comedy and professionalism created an undercurrent of tension from the first rehearsal. Van Dyke arrived early, knew everyone's names, and radiated enthusiasm. Matthau showed up late, grumbled constantly, and improvised unpredictably. A stage manager recalled, "They were like creatures from different planets." The tension centered on timing and tone. Van Dyke's comedy was precise and meticulously rehearsed, while Matthau thrived on improvisation. A costume designer remembered Van Dyke sitting backstage, sighing, "Walter is brilliant and exhausting. I never know if we're doing the scene we rehearsed or something he just invented." The breaking point came during a crucial comedic scene. Matthau repeatedly altered his delivery, making Van Dyke's rhythm impossible. Van Dyke calmly approached the director, requesting a clear decision. Either the scene was rehearsed properly, or he couldn't make it work. Despite the challenges, the production succeeded, earning praise for the contrast between their styles. Van Dyke and Matthau maintained professional courtesy, but never worked together again. For Van Dyke, the experience reinforced a core philosophy. Comedy thrives on trust, consistency, and mutual support, not tension or unpredictability. If Matthau's cynicism tested him, how much darker was Hackett's cruelty? Keep watching to find out. Number 1. Buddy Hackett. In Studio 33 at CBS on a sweltering 1963 afternoon, the air was thick with makeup powder and heat radiating from massive stage lights. Amid the tap of shoes and vibrant backdrops, Dick Van Dyke confronted a harsh reality about Buddy Hackett. If Hollywood were a cathedral of performing arts, Buddy was constantly smearing its walls with vulgarity and contempt. The public adored Hackett for roles in The Music Man and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, but backstage, he radiated negativity. His philosophy, to be great in comedy, one had to be vile. Dick remembered rehearsals where Buddy harassed young female dancers with crude remarks, screamed insults at a costume assistant for a minor mistake, and openly mocked colleagues' professionalism. Hackett's hypocrisy extended to fans. He cheerfully signed autographs for strangers, only to curse them privately afterward. He disrupted co-stars' rhythm with obscene jokes and used humiliation as a tool, spilling wine on a veteran actress simply to mock Van Dyke's clean style. Cruelty masked as humor was Hackett's weapon, protecting his insecurity and lack of refinement. When taping ended, Dick stayed behind to thank janitors, while Buddy had long vanished in a luxury car, leaving a studio of wounded colleagues. Though the memory faded, its sting lingered, a reminder of the darkness that could hide behind laughter. So, now that we have seen the Golden Age stars Dick Van Dyke revealed as evil, let us get to understand what the show that gave him an audience was all about. The Dick Van Dyke Show. The Dick Van Dyke Show wasn't just another sitcom. It was a television milestone that blended humor, heart, and brilliant writing. Created by Carl Reiner, the show aired on CBS from October 1961 to June 1966, spanning 5 seasons and 158 half-hour episodes, produced at Desilu Studios by Calvada Productions alongside CBS. Behind the scenes, Bill Persky and Sam Denoff helped shape its stories, while Earl Hagen composed the unforgettable theme music that became instantly recognizable. At its center was Dick Van Dyke as Rob Petrie, the lovable, goofy head writer for the fictional Alan Brady Show, navigating the chaos of both work and suburban family life in New Rochelle, New York. Sharing the screen were Mary Tyler Moore as his elegant, witty wife Laura, Larry Matthews as their curious son Richie, and an ensemble of unforgettable characters. Maury Amsterdam's sharp-tongued Buddy Sorrell, Rose Marie's sassy Sally Rogers, Richard Deacon's Mel Cooley, and neighbors Millie and Jerry, played by Anne Morgan Gilbert and Jerry Paris. The series thrived on everyday comic scenarios, balancing slapstick, clever wordplay, and relatable family and workplace dynamics. Its influence was profound. 15 Emmy Awards, iconic episodes like Coast to Coast Big Mouth and It May Look Like a Walnut, and repeated recognition by TV Guide as one of the greatest series of all time. Even decades later, in 2013, the Writers Guild of America ranked it 14th among the 101 best-written TV series. The Dick Van Dyke Show wasn't just entertainment, it was a blueprint for modern sitcoms. Its clever mix of charm, intelligence, and physical comedy reflected the talent of its cast and crew, while its enduring legacy reminds audiences why Van Dyke's wit and warmth have remained timeless in television history. What are your thoughts about Dick Van Dyke's revelation? Let us know in the comments section below. Dick Van Dyke's experiences with Hollywood's Golden Age legends prove that even the brightest stars and most beloved icons can hide dark sides behind the glamour. From Sinatra's ruthlessness to O'Toole's self-destruction and Crosby's chilling hypocrisy, these stories reveal the untold truths behind the smiles. If uncovering the hidden realities of these legendary figures surprised you or changed the way you see classic Hollywood, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and click the next video for more shocking stories and untold truths.